How do you sum up a show like The Dragon Prince? Moreover, what do you look at that won't have already been said by a bunch of other people? There were parts I loved, parts I hated, and parts which left me perplexed over why the show took that direction. And I guess the best way is what I said in the video title. The Dragon Prince was on the precipice of greatness, but right when it should have reached the summit, it ended. And it left me wondering, what am I supposed to have taken away from this show? So let's take a look back at what should have been the best cartoon since Avatar, and see what parts gave us this hole. To start off, let's look at the show from the outside perspective. For those who don't know, The Dragon Prince is created by Aaron Ahaz, a former executive producer and writer on Avatar the Last Airbender. And real quick, you're going to notice that theme a lot during this video. Together they founded WOnderstorm, and the company's first project was The Dragon Prince. The show premiered in 2018 was quickly picked up by fans of Avatar and Korra, not least because of the similar feelings all the shows had in common, and because of the fact that Jack Desana, who would voice Sokka, was one of the main characters, Callum. Now that we have the history out of the way, let's look at what we got from this show. To start on a positive note, this show looks freaking amazing. Even in Season 1, where the animation had a very low frame rate, you could pause any point of any episode and have an absolutely stunning piece of art. This carried through all 7 seasons, and let me tell you, there are some ridiculously beautiful shots in this series. I mean, look at the shot of Viren, or this one, or this shot. Or hell, look at how beautiful the glowing hay is. If I don't give this show a perfect 10 out of 10 for anything else, let me just say the animators knocked it out of the park, even when the story didn't. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We're still on the positives, so let's talk about the story. The overall plot is actually really solid. In the same way that Avatar had the initial goal of learn all the elements, The Dragon Prince has the hook right out of the gate with save the Dragon Prince and save the world. Now, I am certainly going to come back to the plot and the overall story to discuss its flaws, but for now, I'll just say from a 10,000 foot level, this story is pretty good. The story also gets helped along by the characters, and for the most part, these are all really good. There is a worrying trend of the side characters being better than the main characters, but the protagonists aren't bad, it's just that they could be better. For example, Viren and Erebos are far, far more interesting than Ezrin or Callum or Rayla. To be fair though, it's not like the villain's greatness comes at the cost of the main characters, it more so just highlights how much better the show could have been with some more complexity in those main characters, which, yeah, I'll talk about that in a minute. The last positive thing I want to mention before really starting to pick apart the series is the score. It won't win any awards, or at least I think I haven't checked yet. Let me see if it did. Hold on a second. Okay, yeah, no, Wikipedia says it didn't, so that's good enough for me. Even if it wasn't a standout piece of the show, it served its purpose and had moments where it went way harder than it ever should have gone. Like, Viren's scene got me really good. But now that I sung its praises, allow me to tell you why this show is just a bag of wasted potential. Where to even begin, honestly? I guess I'll start with my biggest complaint, and that is the insane inconsistency in quality. If I had to rate each season, I'd say it starts off as, a 7, grows to an 8, then hits a really solid 9 with the 3rd season. Then it takes a goddamn swan dive off a cliff. Like 3 out of 10, maybe 4 on a good day. Season 4 is to this show what Season 2 of Legend of Korra was to that show. I mean, I did. Look at it! It's ugly, isn't it? You look at it! Hello. Season 3 had straight up death in it, and not just one either. Like, multiple people got taken out, and 1 or 2 just got removed from this plane of existence entirely. This is on top of all the previous character work, which had been maturing all of our protagonists and challenging them in ways which forced them to grow. So naturally, you'd think that this 4th season would continue that trend, right? Ha! You idiot, you fool, you utter ignoramus. This is a Netflix show after all. Not only do I get subjected to watching the main characters floss in the year of our Lord 2022, but come to find out there have been some minor developments off screen in the accompanying source material. Minor things like, Callum and Rayla breaking up, or Claudia getting a BF, I think Wikipedia says it's complicated, and going on a legit main quest line to resurrect Viren. Nope, definitely didn't want to see all of that happen, didn't want to watch these characters grow even more after the world-changing events of the last season. Anyway, Season 5 gets back on track and gets better and better as it goes, but it gets held back and I give it like a 7. Season 6 is a nice turn to form and gets a 9 out of 10, and then Season 7 is really tricky. I'm saving that rate until the end along with the series wrap-up. This bizarre lack of consistency is, in my opinion, what holds the show back the most. Nothing is more frustrating than knowing a team can produce amazing material only for them to fumble the bag so hard at certain points. This wouldn't be nearly as bad as if it were confined to a single season or two, kind of like in Korra, but here it kind of happens in every single season. Don't get me wrong, Season 3 and Season 6 deserve those ratings I gave them, but even within them, tightly crafted scenes and episodes have inexplicable changes in tone, or decide to randomly ignore logic and reason for the sake of the plot or humor. Like Callum, my guy, you just got possessed by an immortal elf. Do you really think going down into this dungeon alone with the fate of the world literally in your hands is a good idea? Oh, you do? Oh, no one has any objections to this. Okay, I'm sure that's going to be fine, I suppose. This definitely won't be a source of major tension later when it's revealed that you done messed up and let the greatest threat to the world back into this plane of reality. But I digress. It's really hard to give a show a higher mark when it refuses to stay on solid ground for an entire season, and unfortunately this isn't my only problem with the show. Now, while inconsistency is quite annoying, setting up interesting conflicts only to do literally nothing with them is arguably more so. And boy, does this show do that in spades. Strangely, though, it's worse about this in the later seasons and not the earlier ones. There's the nothing burger of parallels between Callum and Ezran having the same basic relationship as Viren and Harrow. The fact that different cultures and reconciliation between them is a major point of conflict in Season 4, oh, that just sort of gets, swept under the rug. Callum being forced to decide between using dark magic and the good of those around him. The Celestial Elves having literally no ill repercussions for their actions, which have set the world down this dark path. The broader implications that humans can in fact use magic, and how this fundamentally upends the rationale used to persecute them and segregate them from the rest of the world in the first place. So yeah, there's just a few issues, wouldn't you say? And I think Season 4, along with Callum and Ezran's relationship, are what anger me the most, so I'll briefly discuss both of them. So as it turns out, there were some actually really thought-provoking ideas to unpack here in the 4th season. And don't you dare say this is all too much for kids, because no, it isn't. Plenty of kids shows have heavy topics. Avatar did it, Korra did it, that show I'm never going to watch probably did it, and Clone Wars did it, and so on and so forth. One of the main conflicts of the 4th season is the integration of humans and elves in the ruins of the Sunfire Elf civilization. There's a lingering animosity between both sides after a millennia of division and the fact that a human mage just destroyed their empire. But that glorious, interesting dilemma is painted in such a black and white picture as to be comical. Oh, you wanted to honor your dead relative? Too bad, bitch boy, that's a fire hazard, not OSHA compliant. And then the response isn't, hey, you're being insanely insensitive to a foreign country. Yeah, no, instead we get a sham trial which just forces the human to work with a Sunfire Elf on building a temple to understand them more. Now, I'm not saying this is the worst way to portray this issue, but come on. You couldn't do anything with more depth. You couldn't have this be a misunderstanding which explodes into strife like would be more realistic. You can't let each side rightfully air their grievances with the other. You can't show both sides having factions that, might be against this reconciliation. Yes, this has been touched on prior to this in the show, but it felt like this is such a missed opportunity to let Ezran or Amaya or Janai shine as a peacemaker. Oh, what's that? You don't have an issue with the 4 seasons not having a culture clash after 1,000 years of hate and animosity. Well then, how about Season 6 and 7 not building upon the parallels between Ezran and Callum as King and High Mage, and how they're perfectly mirroring Harrow and Viren? Viren and Harrow have been shown to be, best friends throughout the entire show until they're falling out over how to handle a mistake in a situation from which there was really no good answer. Now, years later, Callum is the High Mage and Ezran is the King. Callum wants blanket amnesty for the elves, while Ezran is, reasonably, in a fragile state after his kingdom has been reduced to rubble, and the person who killed his father is walking around it. What do we do with this? We have one escape scene where Ezran gets angry at Callum for defying a direct order from his king and helping his father's murderer get away. So if you couldn't tell, I'm with Ezran on this one. Punishment is definitely deserved, and yeah, he was living in a living hell for a couple of years, but do you really think a person in Ezran's place is going to be thinking like that? No. The answer is in fact no. Regardless, the show had been building up Ezran as a little more unhinged since Katalis was burned to the ground. And this would have made for a very interesting conflict on the side of the good guys. Both want to win against Erebos while also having their ulterior motives in the background. Instead, they just kind of make up and Ezran more or less moves on at the end of the show. And you see, it's these kinds of things which really hold the show back in my opinion. Then there's the ever-present shadow of Mr. Ahaz and his previous body of work. For you see, not only did he work on Avatar, but so did Jack Desana, aka Sokka. And there are so many other different parts of this show which harken back to Avatar. Be that with blink and you miss it references to legitimately funny callbacks, or even Zim's only lines in the entire show being delivered by Dante Bosco. Yeah, Zuko is in The Dragon Prince, and he is a dragon.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme, every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one.
There's even a scene borrowed straight from Season 3 of Avatar when Zuko's practicing apologizing to the group and joining the gang. Now, I think everyone appreciated the subtle callbacks and the boomerang gag, but this highlights one of the show's main flaws. It could never grow out of the massive shadow of Avatar. If you thought Korra was overshadowed by Avatar, you got another thing coming. This show couldn't even move out of it, and they were in entirely different universes. So those are my major gripes, but the last thing I'll mention is the whole whiplash-inducing switches between childhood humor, genuinely funny moments, and heavy serious dialogue. There are too many instances to count, so I'm just mentioning it here because the sum total effect is that my immersion in the show and in various situations is cut short and degrades the viewing experience. So, what can I say about this show then, after all of my complaints? Well, this is a show which never really grew up. It's like a kid going to middle school. They think they're all grown up now, and in many ways they are. They can tackle more complex issues, they can think a bit deeper and handle more responsibility, but they're still a kid at heart. They still miss some of the biggest parts of what it means to mature. And after a runtime which, intentionally or not, lasted 6 years, not growing for your audience is sort of a cardinal sin when it comes to cartoons. Since this show liked to reuse Avatar whenever possible, I'll just compare them. Think of how Avatar changed as a show from its first episodes to the end. In 3 years, the show went from a goofy once-a-week kids adventure to a show where characters reconcile the fact that they didn't have a childhood after losing their parents, where the audience gets exposed to the ideas of, rigid class segregation, brainwashing, indoctrination, mental fragility, genocide. And you want me to take your show as seriously as that? You want this to be Game of Thrones for kids? Your target audience went from being middle schoolers to graduating from high school in the time it took you to put out 7 seasons. This show kind of fails in the same way that The Incredibles succeeds, where that movie was made for adults to be enjoyed by kids, and instead, this show just tries to appeal to all the kids and never grows up. And so we neatly come to my thoughts on Season 7, the only season which I didn't rate so far. Just like the rest of the show, which never really grew up and had so much potential, Season 7 is the perfect encapsulation of that. Conflict which are set up only to be dropped or quickly resolved, heavy choices solved by luck or deus ex machinas, the beauty and emotion of the previous seasons wrapped up in a package with what holds this show back. And for all that, we don't even get a satisfying conclusion. Answers still lay hidden, characters' futures are left open to interpretation, the main villain is only defeated temporarily, and some characters are set out on a quest as their last seen. This is all without mentioning the revelation that the events that started all of this, the death of a king and the finding of the egg of the dragon prince, was a lie. The dumbest theory out there about the bird being soul-swapped with the king turned out to be true. All this pain and suffering, the conflicts of the entire show, all more or less the consequence of a stupid plot point which Viren 1000% should have mentioned to somebody prior to the reveal in the final episode. So you know what? I'm giving this season what I give this show, a 7.5 out of 10. Perhaps they will announce that there will be a sequel series. Maybe this is a satisfactory conclusion for some viewers, but for me, unless they finish the show, it will always be the masterpiece that never was, a show unwilling to take its seat on the throne. Later, nerds.